This story isn't about a kingdom that surprises us with its scale. It's about a kingdom that surprises us with its character. Jesus says, "A man will plant a mustard seed in his garden, and it will grow and become a tree, and the birds of the air will perch in its branches." There's actually 3 problems with this. The first is this: mustard seeds aren't supposed to go in gardens. See, way back in Leviticus 19, there are rules about planting your seeds. And one of the big no-nos was planting 2 different types of seeds in the same plot of land. Jesus tells another parable about wheat and weeds that grow mingled together in the same field. That plays off that same rule all the way back in Leviticus 19. Now, this story has a single man planting a single seed, so he doesn't seem to break the rules, and technically he doesn't. But the problem with mustard seeds specifically is that they grow into these very kind of scraggly, scrubby bushes that tend to creep and crawl their way across your garden. I remember at our previous house, we used to have these big lilac bushes, and they were beautiful for like 14 minutes in the spring each year. But they were also notorious for popping up all over the place. So you could get a shoot of a lilac like 5 feet away from the original bush. They were great. Very hard to contain, though. Mustard bushes are the same kind of thing. And that presented problems, because once you plant one anywhere near anything else, it would have a way of popping up in the next plot where it wasn't supposed to be, accidentally running afoul of the rule from Leviticus 19. And so in the Mishnah, which was a collection of Jewish teachings that sat alongside the Hebrew scriptures, there was a section called Seder Zeraim, which meant the order of seeds. And in that Mishnah, it strongly advised against, let's say, planting mustard seeds anywhere in gardens where they might unintentionally cross over into the next plot of land. So, does this man break any rules in the story? Well, no, technically he doesn't, but he's skirting pretty close to the line already. However, you might have picked up on this already. The second problem here, and the reason there was even a rule for building and planting mustard seeds in your gardens, is that mustard seeds do not grow into trees. In fact, they're kind of more like scrubby, scraggly shrubs. Now, those shrubs can at times develop a thicker, more developed stalk, almost like a trunk, but they are decidedly not trees. And this isn't just a mistranslation. Mustard plants are of a category in Greek called lakana. Here, Jesus very specifically uses the word dendron, or tree, in his story. However, that's not a mistake. It's a callback to the Hebrew prophets. This is Ezekiel 17. This is what the sovereign Lord says: "I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and I'll plant it. I'll break off a tiny tender sprig from the topmost shoots and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain heights of Israel, I will plant it, and it will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it. They will find shelter in the shade of its branches." Sounds familiar? Let's take a look at another passage. This is Daniel 4. "These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong. Its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. Birds from every creature, they were fed." And this passage, again, just like Ezekiel, it's a vision, it's prophecy about the purpose and the destination of God's people. A great tree that becomes a source of shelter and food, a space where even the birds of the air find refuge. I want to point out that line. In Ezekiel specifically, it actually says the birds of the air, and in the NIV translation of Jesus' story, we just get a reference to the birds, but if you go back to Greek, we find that Jesus actually very specifically calls out the birds of the air in Luke 13. It's the exact same phrase that's used in Ezekiel. Now, that's important because Jesus is not just going out of his way to exclude flightless birds here, like no ostriches in the kingdom of heaven, I suppose. No, he's very specifically using language intentionally, deliberately to connect his words here to that imagination of the Hebrew people. He wants us to hear this story and then go and look up those passages. And when we do, what do we find? Well, we find that the prophetic imagination for the kingdom of God throughout the Hebrew scriptures looks like a tiny sprig planted by God that grows into an enormous tree and becomes shelter for the birds of the air. A very familiar story, except what do we then notice when Jesus tells the same story back to us? Well, in Jesus' version of the story, it's not a great cedar. It's a scrubby shrub planted where it's not really supposed to be. The kind of scrubby shrub that has a tendency to pop up in places it's really not supposed to be. And not only that, but what does it attract in Jesus' story? Well, more of the things that show up where they're not supposed to be. Now, in Ezekiel's image, in Daniel's image, the idea of the birds gathering in the branches of a great cedar, I mean, that's wonderful. It's beautiful, right? Those birds represent all the Gentile nations turning toward God, finding respite and peace in a violent world. The image is wonderful. But you know what you don't want? Gathering in your garden, building nests where you've cultivated plants, presumably to feed your family? We have some big, beautiful trees in our backyard. They provide really nice shade. They're fun for my kids to climb. But you know what they also bring to our backyard? Magpies. And I don't know if you've never met a magpie screeching at you just because you dared to step outside your home into your own backyard. It is less than pleasant. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat chicken. If magpie was on the menu, I might consider it just out of spite. Point is, the image of the birds of the air gathering in your garden, swooping in to scream at you while they eat your crops, making a home in a mustard plant that you are working really hard to cultivate and constantly having to prune just to make sure it doesn't pop up where you don't want it to be. This image is telling us the same story that's well known from the Hebrew prophets, but with a very important twist. The kingdom is not just something that grows large. The kingdom is something that pops up where it's not supposed to be and welcomes those who aren't supposed to be there in the first place. In fact, this parable is taking a well-known, repeated image from the Hebrew scriptures, one that spoke to national pride, and let's be honest here, probably even national arrogance. An image that said, we're the ones that everyone will come to. We're the source of God's blessing in the world. We're the shining light on a hill. And it completely inverts the narrative. Sure, we might get to plant the seed, but the kingdom grows where it wants to. And it welcomes those we shoo away. The kingdom is perhaps nothing like the image we've been holding on to in our mind. And again, remember the context here. Jesus enters the synagogue, heals a woman who has been burdened for 18 years. The critique is, well, this is improper. She should come back another time. She should respect our rules. Jesus says, one, you don't know your rules to begin with. And more importantly, you have no idea what the kingdom of God will even look like when it shows up. So what should I compare it to? Well, I'll compare it to your imagination. You think the kingdom of God is like a majestic cedar, strong and tall, powerful. You think the kingdom of God will look exactly like how you want to look at yourself. I tell you, the kingdom of God is like a scrubby bush that shows up not just where you don't expect, but where you don't want it to be. And it welcomes not just those who show up not on your timeline, but those you would chase away. The kingdom is for those like this woman that you've scolded and I welcome. This story isn't about a kingdom that surprises us with its scale. It's about a kingdom that surprises us with its character. This isn't a story about a kingdom that overwhelms us with majesty and spectacle. It's about a kingdom that looks decidedly ordinary. This isn't a story about eschatology. It's not about one day when the kingdom will get big enough to take over. This is a story about grace and about a kingdom that exists right now in our midst, popping up, poking through all around us all the time, and our consistent ability to constantly miss it. And maybe all of a sudden, that story starts to feel familiar in a way you didn't expect it to. Maybe you never cared about mustard seeds. But maybe you have been the one on the outside looking in at religion, and you found yourself drawn to Jesus, something you couldn't quite put your finger on, but you knew you needed to move closer to that story, to find your way to him. Except whenever you tried, there was always someone there to say, not now, not that way, you're doing it wrong, come back when you can follow the rules properly. Our cedar is too beautiful for you to sully. To which finally we hear Jesus say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and to me, a kingdom that pops up unexpected. A kingdom that tends to cross our carefully manicured lines. A kingdom that provides shelter for the ignored and food for the hungry. That kind of kingdom would look absolutely gorgeous in any garden that I would be interested in planting. And maybe that kind of kingdom could then actually begin to shape the way that we care for each other while we wait for it to appear.